BC. So this is our context that we're working with. The city of Port Moody is a city of 33,000 people. Because of its proximity to Vancouver and also its multiple connections to rapid transit, the city has been densifying quite rapidly. So they have quite a few large-scale high-rise developments that are going up. A lot of kind of missing middle townhouse infill projects happening as well. And the city of Port Moody really wanted to create some kind of policy that was helping shape the way that they approach social connection in their work. So we worked with them to create an incentive-based policy that offers detailed design guidelines and criteria for supporting social well-being in multi-unit housing. So we've kind of said that by complying with criteria in the guidelines, developers are eligible for various incentives like floor area exclusions and reduced parking requirements. So I've kind of tried to split up this case study into 5 key learnings, which have been kind of the emerging findings that we have done through this work. And we learned a ton by doing this process. So the first one was really about aligning policy goals with political will. And this is critical to making both this Port Moody policy example, and I'll touch on the North Van policy example. But this kind of idea of thoughtful framing makes a difference. So I encourage you to think about your own context and your own counselors and what they're really worried about and how you can kind of build social connection into that. The second was really that new policies should complement existing ones, and often, the process can offer an opportunity to refine or consolidate layers of policy that are no longer needed or are no longer working in the way that we wanted them to work. The third was this idea of this outcome-based design, which kind of is trying to balance regulation and not having so many rules that your process gets bogged down, with this flexibility while kind of encouraging people to think about intentional social connection without being prescriptive. The fourth is really that incentives can drive design change without adding regulatory burdens. And the fifth is really about tracking policy outcomes and this kind of industry engagement piece, which was really essential for hopefully continued success with this policy. So first, really aligning policy goals with political will. I'm sure you've probably reflected in the breakouts. We asked, where are you talking about social connection? You might have brought up other topics like family-friendly, age-friendly, healthy communities, walkability, accessibility. Yeah, these are all connected to social well-being. So the way that you frame these policies can come in many different forms. So this one, again, in Port Moody, it really started with a political champion. There was a counselor who really loved the idea of social connection in multi-unit housing, really started to push it as an idea. And they kind of put in a motion to say, we want to look at this, we want to become innovators in this. So the city of Port Moody kind of followed that direction. They got directed to kind of pursue a grant, which they were lucky to get. It was a small grant, but allowed them to work with Happy Cities. And we also kind of took our bit of time to get through all this policy, but it was unanimously approved by council in 2024. So one of the key pieces that we found was really important when talking about these policies is getting consensus right from the beginning on, what are we trying to achieve? And we kind of expressed this through well-being principles in the Port Moody example. So this was really like our guiding star. Whenever we were struggling to say, should we offer this incentive or this incentive, we used kind of a pretty rigorous way to make decisions, and coming back to kind of our key principles, which were, affordable, age and family friendly, healthy, socially connected, and resilient. And we kind of defined what those meant for us. And so when we had to make decisions, we went back to these. So this is why, for example, we chose to go towards an incentive-based approach, because we felt that adding more regulation could jeopardize affordability. Again, this piece, new policy should complement existing ones. This is really important. We want to make sure that all these things are working together and not creating more barriers and complexity. So we had kind of a 4-step process to do the work with Port Moody. The first was really about doing our background homework. So we reviewed both kind of innovative examples like the North Van example and see what can we learn from them, but also started mapping out, okay, what other policies does Port Moody already have? And one of the key pieces that they had was a sustainability checklist. So we knew that whatever we did also had to work with that existing policy. The development of the guiding principles, as I said, were really critical in helping us make decisions. And then we did a lot of kind of engagement and testing and iteration to make sure that these were actually working. So we had a committee of community members. We had a working group with developers and architects who work in Port Moody, as well as conversations with staff across departments in the city of Port Moody. So both from development planning and kind of housing planning side of things and social planning. And we actually were able to kind of test and iterate the impact of this policy on some existing case study projects. So we looked at both low-rise, mid-rise, and high-rise examples. And we used kind of all of this information to inform our decision-making, particularly with selecting incentives. Yeah, and we recognize that editing existing policies can be really hard. People get attached to them. They have been there for a long time. So yeah, we encourage you to go back to your own kind of desk and look at what do you have in terms of your policies and how is it serving you or not serving you, and what is kind of the change that you need to see. So in this case, as I said, we kind of ended up having to tie our policy, to the official community plan, obviously, the family-friendly units policy, as well as the sustainability report card that they had already. So yeah, our goal was really to provide guidance to developers and architects without being overly prescriptive. For example, we're not going to ask for 10 community garden beds with these dimensions and these features, or a certain play structure. But we want them to think intentionally about how social connection is going to happen in the building. And we're hoping that this approach really leads to some innovative and interesting design solutions. So we really want to, again, open the door for developers and architects to come to the city with their solutions. So you'll see in the guidelines, which you can check out online, we've got kind of 6 categories. So first is site layout and use. This is really around encouraging courtyard buildings, which is something the city of Port Moody wanted to do. Prominent entrances and active transitions, again, that really important transition zone to the public realm. Purposeful parking, so this was a particular interest of the city of Port Moody. The social circulation piece, and then more guidance on kind of the shared amenities. We also included kind of best practices in programming and policy in a light touch way. Again, the city didn't feel like they could particularly regulate or incentivize, but they did want people to start thinking about it as they made their design decisions. So kind of talking to developers and architects, really what we've been hearing is when requirements become too specific, they can risk becoming checklist items, and they don't necessarily meet the intent of what the policy is trying to achieve, which is maybe an age-friendly building or a family-friendly building or a more socially connected building. And then the importance of really defining these policies. So sometimes we put out design guidelines with the best intentions. Sometimes those design guidelines feel like they become regulation over time, and that leads to kind of sometimes unequal application across projects, which can lead to kind of delays and frustration. So we wanted to kind of avoid that as much as possible. This is just an example. I won't go through everything, but we tried to kind of write our guidelines in a way that they highlighted the most kind of important features that we found through research and evidence for social interaction. without being overly prescriptive. So we always give kind of opportunities to say, show us your example, show us your solution.